Doom. Few words carry such an evocative sense of dread, and when Doom was released on unsuspecting gamers all the way back in '93, it was the game's overriding sense of dread that left players with the feeling that they played something truly special. That and the fact they'd just seen the future of the FPS genre, a genre that has gone from strength to strength in the years that have followed to become one of the most dominant forces in the video gaming climate. Doom started it all. Now, it may not have been the first FPS, but it certainly was the game that perfected the tropes that we've now come to associate with this ever-popular type of game. Now, it may seem ridiculous to younger viewers who weren't exposed to the game at an early age, an age before near photorealistic graphics, but when Doom was released, it was a genuinely terrifying experience. A game so shockingly scary that it made people want to tear out their own eyeballs in terrified indignation. And while that might be a slight exaggeration, there were indeed points in the game that made me hard power off my PC due to the scare factor just reaching too damn high. Amazing really, given these days it looks like a game made using teletext. The Doom reboot, and let's be clear here, this is a reboot and not a sequel, is gloriously gore-laden, with both human and demon viscera dripping from every dark-lit corridor and hall. And that's nice! It's good flavour for a Doom game, because lest we forget, Doom, at its core, is a horror game. And horror games should be horrifying, albeit in a slightly caricature-driven sense. Still, it's not the horror aspect that makes a Doom game feel like a Doom game. Dead Space is a violent horror shit-em-up set outside the Earth's atmosphere, but it certainly doesn't feel like a Doom game. The thing that makes a Doom game is momentum. Doom has momentum in spades. It's fast, and that's a good thing because speed is something gloriously ignored in the majority of FPS games released in the past few years. The original Doom, as the first true innovator of the genre, had speed in spades, and it's fantastic to see that the reboot has well and truly mined inspiration from its great-great-granddad. The game pulses hypnotically with the kind of rhythmic momentum that propels you forward with ever-growing urgency, and it's an urgency that grants the game a certain kind of feel. It's a feel that gives you the impression that your actions are both important, but are also born of a kind of sick desperation that makes you feel further that the things that you're doing are necessary. The speed of the game also succeeds in making you feel really fucking cool. It empowers you. I mean, how could it not? Ripping through legions of hellspawn one after another to the sound of a thumping metal soundtrack. The game makes you feel like a badass, and ultimately, that's always been the intention of Doom. You get to become the baddest fucker on Mars, and that, my friends, is awesome. That isn't to say that the game isn't without its faults. Indeed, the very badassery that makes the game so cool is the thing that I'll be levelling my super shotgun of criticism at first. The original Doom game was lonely. It was lonely because it worked tirelessly to reinforce this idea of isolation, and isolation is scary. You never felt supported in the original Doom games because you quite literally had no support. It was one man against the entirety of hell, and because of that, you felt pant-fillingly terrified. The Doom reboot setup is slightly different, most probably because modern games feel the need to bolt on a story to their campaign, but they feel is sophisticated enough to justify the huge amounts of money spent on developing it. Telling a story with a single voiceless character is tough. It's not impossible, but it's tough. And so, the Doom reboot has us interacting with a cast of characters that, while few in number, make you feel like you're never really alone, which, in my mind, damages the original ethos of the game's origins. Sadly, it goes deeper than that too. The original Doom games had you playing the role of a lone marine, left to secure the perimeter while the rest of the team move on inside first. They all die, and so it's left to you with no way back, because Doom Guy can't fly a space shuttle, to move the only way you can: forwards. This setup was perfect. Primitive, but perfect. It made you feel vulnerable, which in turn made you feel more scared. Well, at least until Bill Gates decided he wanted to crash the party.
And better. Yeah. Don't interrupt me.
The simple inclusion of having the Doom Guy's face indicate your damage status was also a masterstroke, as it established a link between player and video game character. when he got bloodied up and gradually looked more and more like shit, you felt for him because you could see that this poor guy, facing up against insurmountable odds, was losing the battle, and more than that, but it was your fault. And that is some deep shit right there. Even if he does sometimes resemble a guy that snagged a particularly painful hemorrhoid after wiping a little bit too hard. From the very first scene, the Doom reboot establishes that this new iteration of the Doom guy is something a little bit more special. I mean, anyone that wakes up on an operating table bound by chains is generally not your normal, everyday run-of-the-mill guy, and normal he does not prove to be. As you'll soon find, Doom Guy 2016 tears around the game with the air of a guy who really doesn't give a shit about petty little things like pain or suffering. Yep, he feels pretty damn invincible. Now I know I said earlier that it's awesome to become the ultimate badass, that tearing the jaws off space demons before beating them to death with their own appendages is fun, but it constantly reinforces the idea that Doom Guy 2016 is simply unstoppable. That his victory is a formality and that the monsters sent to stop him are mere inconveniences as opposed to Hellspawn bent on stopping him at any cost. When you die in the new Doom, more often than not it's your own fault. The game breeds a recklessly cavalier attitude, attributed in my eyes to the fact that enemies dispatched in a certain way drop health and ammo bonuses. The new game, so obsessed as it is with creating its rhythmic-like pulsating momentum, that it seems to have forgotten that the original Dooms bred a higher stakes game by forcing you into a corner that only skill and desperation could get you out of. And because of that, when you died, it felt way more impactful than death does in the new game. Where the older games made death feel important, each one slowly turning the screw of hopeless despair, the new game makes death feel irrelevant, an annoying delay to the salvation brought about by our unstoppable hero. He becomes the quintessential FPS protagonist, a guy with a dick and a gun, but very little else of any interest. Speaking of guns, the game throws a veritable bevy of interesting firepower your way. Each one is interesting and different enough to merit its inclusion, whilst also simultaneously tipping its hat to the weapons of the game's earlier entries. When you find a new weapon, it's cool. It feels like an event, which is important in games where we're often thrown new weaponry without so much as a "Hi, how's it going? Let me buy you a drink." I like that it feels significant when you find cool new shit, but then maybe that's just me. Not to mention the way the weapon selection system has been implemented is beautifully realised. Where most FPS games allow you to cycle through your weapons with a single tap of a button, Doom forces you into a selection screen while the game continues on around you. However, it does so in a slow motion, bullet time evocative way that maintains the urgency of a firefight, whilst also allowing you to take a split second to change to a weapon more suited to blasting whichever demon scum you're currently trying to fuck up. And fuck them up you will indeed be doing, in all manner of different ways. Now, the enemies in Doom do eventually turn into mere fodder, but still it's cool fodder, with all the reimagined classics making an appearance and looking glorious all the while. Never more so than during the glory kill system, wherein once an enemy has been reduced to a certain amount of health, they begin to flash. That's your prompt to hit the melee button and finish them off in the most gory of ways. When I first started Doom, it looked like a cool in-game flourish, but one that I'd soon tire of after a few hours of playing. But it never happened, and it remained just as satisfying to pull off, even in the game's latter stages. The fact that it doesn't interrupt the game's obsessive compulsion with momentum really is quite impressive, so yeah, well done. Have a slow clap. Given the strength of the single-player campaign, it's really puzzling to me why the game's publisher decided against sending out review copies to media outlets, a tactic that must have affected a few people's opinions with regards to buying the game on day one. It's a policy that generally reeks of a poorly made inferior product. My only guess is that the bigwigs over at Bethesda were afraid that the lackluster multiplayer aspects of the game, upon reviewing poorly, might put people off investing in the game. In an age where multiplayer is the primary concern for most consumers, it makes me sad to think that some people won't play Doom's excellent single-player campaign because once it's done, the game will essentially be worthless to them. It makes me sad, but that said, I do get it. A game's longevity these days is wholly bound to its multiplayer aspect. It's the reason why the majority of the world's most popular games are the ones that exploit this competitive multiplayer facet. So while Doom is a fantastic single-player game, ultimately it's a game that most people will have finished in under 10 hours, and that is not a lot of time for a game that costs upwards of £40. The multiplayer, as I detailed in my Overwatch beta review, is okay. A bit of lightweight fun, but generally speaking a derivative clone of nearly every other sci-fi shooter on the market, with a little Doom flavour thrown in to make it seem unique. Sadly, it isn't, at least not enough for me, and so in that sense I find it very hard to recommend Doom as a multiplayer experience. There are simply better things available. Ultimately, the new Doom from a single player aspect is a ton of fun. I genuinely can't remember the last time I purchased a game and rinsed it to completion in less than 48 hours, but that was the case with Doom. The unstoppable momentum and the fun that came with that demanded that I do so, and in that sense, the game is a towering triumph. Sure, it doesn't have much of the genuine terror that straddled the original game's campaign, but then in this day and age, I'm really not sure it's possible to have your cake and eat it in the same way that games were able to do so in the early 90s, a time when the rules to games were very much still being written. Regardless, it's a great reboot to one of gaming's great franchises. French fries. I like fries. And in my opinion, it's well worth your time. Thanks for tuning in, folks. More of the same in the annotations, and subscribe if you feel like it. It'd be pretty cool. Until next time.